Hi there. It's Pastor Veronica Smith here with a daily devotion for you. We are continuing our digging deeper look at Barbara Brown Taylor's When God is Silent. This is actually not a book so much as it is a collection of lectures in preaching that were delivered at Yale Divinity School by Barbara Brown Taylor in 1997. I know that might seem to some of you like that's been a long time ago, but I want you to know that much of what is written in here is pretty timeless. There's a few references to things like pagers and fax machines, which aren't as common in our vernacular today, but nonetheless, there is a lot here that still works for today, very much so. So just a reminder, as always, when we do our devotional books and studies, that we are not doing the whole book from cover to cover because, of course, we want to support the authors. So in this case, we're just going to be doing excerpts from each of the chapters or sections of this book. So the first section was called Famine. We did about 4 or 5 sections of that, or excerpts from that. The next section was called Silence, and we are doing a handful of excerpts from that. And then I'll save for next week what our next section is going to be. If you want to get a copy of this, it's available with Cloister Books. It's also available with Cowley Publications. So get yourself a copy of When God is Silent. If you do have a copy of this text by Barbara Brown Taylor, we are going to be starting on page 51 today. So I'll read to you a little section and then we'll talk about it a bit. Sometimes I think we do all the talking because we are afraid God won't, or conversely, that God will. Either way, staying preoccupied with our own words seems a safer bet than opening ourselves up either to God's silence or God's speech, both of which have the power to undo us. In our own age, I believe God's silence is the more threatening, perhaps because it is the more frequently experienced of the two. Very few people come to see me because they want to discuss something God said to them last night. The large majority come because they cannot get God to say anything at all. They have asked as sincerely as they know how for answers, for guidance, for peace, but they are still missing those things. They want me to tell them what they have done wrong. They have heard me talk about God on Sundays, and they hope they can make use of my connections. Perhaps I know a special technique they can try, or better yet, perhaps I can lend my own weight to the cause, adding the poundage of my prayers to theirs in an effort to force some sound from God. Their wish to hear God speak is not unfounded. The Bible they read portrays a God who not only speaks, but who also acts. Right there on the page, the faithful receive what they ask for: children, manna, land, health. By implication, those who do not receive are not faithful. They are not right with God. If they were, God would speak to them. For everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds, and for everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. Luke 11, verse 10. This is the condemnation that hangs over the silence of God, as if that silence could mean only one thing. Meanwhile, Scripture is full of silences, both human and divine, that mean not one, but many different things. The phrase hester panim, the hiding of the face, occurs more than 30 times in the Hebrew Bible in reference to God. The major prophets all use it, and so do the psalmists and the writer of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, after Moses has finished writing down the words of the law to the very end, God predicts that all in all, it will not do much good, that people being people, it will not be long before they are dancing with cows again. So Moses writes a warning song and sings it to the whole assembly of Israel, reminding them what will happen when they do. I will hide my face from them, God says in that song. I will see what their end will be. Memorize this, Moses says to the people. When they can no longer remember the sound of God's voice, he wants them to know why. Hebrew scholar Richard Elliott Friedman has written a book called The Disappearance of God, in which he chronicles divine recession in the Hebrew Bible. Working his way from Genesis to the minor prophets, he paints a portrait of God that fades as he goes. Divine features that were distinct at the beginning of the story grow blurry as God withdraws, stepping back from human beings so that they have room to step forward. After Babel, Friedman says, God was never again made visible to all humankind. The people of Israel were extended special privileges that lasted throughout their 40 years in the wilderness. But once Moses saw God's backside on Mount Sinai, the period of visible, audible encounters with God began to come to an end. After the delivery of the commandments, God never spoke directly to the people again. Moses, the mediator, wore a veil. The Ark of the Covenant was placed inside a tent. When Moses died, there was no one left on earth who had actually laid eyes on God. Oof. I don't know about you guys, that's sort of intense to hear, and something I really never paid much attention to. I'm so grateful for biblical scholars that focus on the Hebrew Bible, what we refer to Christians as the Old Testament. I'm so grateful that someone looked at that and said, wow, we really do get less and less and less as time goes on. You think about Genesis, which, at the very beginning of creation, and then people, and God has relationship with the people, and with the creation, and in the Garden of Eden, and talks to the people and is seen by them. And then you go on, and that's in Genesis and Exodus. We have all these stories of Moses, and we have Noah's Ark, and we have all these experiences of God speaking to the people and having relationship with them in which they can see and understand him. And we just don't have that anymore. And I guess I didn't realize that really by the time we get through the Pentateuch, which are the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, by the time we get through the Pentateuch, we don't see God anymore at all. We don't hear God's voice, at least not in a literal sense. But what I think we miss if we focus too much on the disappearance of God, which is the title of Friedman's book, then we miss the fact that God appears to us and speaks to us all the time. But we just aren't as aware of it, or we don't realize it ourselves because we're not looking for it or listening for it. We're so busy looking and listening at everything else because there's so much noise around us that we don't realize that little tiny bird that just landed on a branch beside you in your garden was a message from God, a reminder of love and hope and creation. Or maybe when your child or grandchild says, I love you, that's a message from God too. God speaking to you through your child or grandchild and saying, I love you too. It's so important. And I think that's why Barbara Brown Taylor wrote this entire section called Silence, because we really stink at being in the silence. And what is hard about that and challenging about that is that when we are struggling with being in the silence, that we struggle so much with hearing God and knowing what lessons God has for us, what teachings, what promises, what prayers and blessings. We don't hear those things and we don't see them because we're not looking for them, because we're too busy looking at other things. We're too busy being distracted. Listening is the same way. We're too busy hearing other stuff, all this other noise that's going on around us, to notice the beautiful and wonderful things that God is telling us and saying to us. I think it's especially important this time of year where we are here in Texas. It's pretty darn hot. I know in other places it's starting to cool off a little bit. It was 97 here yesterday, and it's going to be in the upper 90s here today. But that's okay. We can still go outside briefly, but I would love to just call on you to go outside today. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but sometime the next day or two, just to go outside and just look at the clouds, look at the grass, look at your favorite plant in your backyard or your front yard. Notice the ants or the lizards or squirrels or whatever animals are in your area, polar bears maybe, depending on where you're listening. But to take a moment and just sit and look around at the messages God's creation is sending to you. Maybe I'm a bit on a creation fix right now because that's what we're celebrating in the congregation that I serve in worship on Sundays. We're about to wrap up the season of creation, so I've been very creation focused. But I think God speaks to us through creation, through clouds and trees and grass and flowers and bees and ants and squirrels and lizards and hummingbirds and cardinals and blue jays, through the way our feet feel in the grass, through the sounds of cicadas, the crickets, the stars in the sky. God is speaking to us, and God is showing God's self to us all the time. just need to take a moment and look for God and listen for God in all the places where we can be right now. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you today, and I look forward to you joining me next week for a continued look at When God is Silent by Barbara Brown Taylor. We're only going to be looking at this one for just a few more weeks, and then we're going to be moving on to something else. So if you still get a chance to get yourself a copy, please do. It's such a great, great collection of sermons, and I can't recommend it enough. You've heard me say before, this is my second copy because my first one was so beat up it fell apart. I think I might have loaned another copy out to someone else and never got it back. So please make sure you get yourself a copy of When God is Silent by Barbara Brown Taylor. Again, available with Cowley Publications or Cloister Books. Remember, friends, God loves you, and so do I. Have a wonderful day.